Anyway, as people find their way to their seats, I like to say, well, thank you to everybody in the first session, but the second session, we have Professor Andy Neal to chair. He's based in the middle of Devon, but he's often not here. You find him sometimes in Australia, Brazil, Uruguay, India, China. I run into him on Paddington Station looking most disconsolate, having returned from the beaches of Punta del Este, where he has been studying soil. And I gather from Andy's website that he uses shotgun metagenomics and X-ray computed tomography to study soils. And I think going on, I've got nothing to add to that confusing phrase, but I think one should take it that he knows a lot about soil and is very well equipped to chair this second session. So I better hand over at that point before I get more muddled. So, Andy.
Thank you, Harry. And uncharacteristically, I'm not really going to say an awful lot. And I'm certainly not going to be talking about X-ray computed tomography because there's an expert in the room, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut. What I would like to do, though, is just to introduce you to what I think is a very exciting panel. The only bit of microbiology I'm going to touch on is that what I've learned from studying soil microbes is that no individual cell operates on its own, and actually what we study in soil is a community. And I think today's panel very much exemplifies that sort of view of life. They all have different backgrounds and they all have different expertise, but their work is something that I hold in very high regard individually, and I'm hoping that collectively we will be able to give you an interesting and educational view of natural systems, particularly looking at reduced disturbance within agricultural systems and the benefits that they bring for soil and above and below ground biodiversity. So I just want to introduce the panel. Sasha Mooney is just taken up a position as head of School of Biosciences at the University of Nottingham, and is co-director of the Hounsfield facility, where we do a lot of our X-ray computed tomography. So that's why I don't want to speak about it, because he knows a lot more than I do about it. But Sasha will be talking to us about how soil changes in response to the way it is managed, particularly low disturbance systems. Next is Kelly Jowett, who is a colleague from Rothamsted. Those of you who haven't come across Kelly before will be hit immediately by her enthusiasm for ground beetles and all things dung beetles as well. And Kelly has really developed a unique niche in working very directly with farmers in very practical ways, but generating very important scientific information. I'm very passionate that as scientists, we need to be working with farmers, and we need to be helping you, and we need to be learning from you. So both Sasha and Kelly are doing that in a big way, and that they'll be talking about that. I only met Martin Lines last night, but until last night, he was the face of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. And I've since, discussing with him last night, know that actually he's an awful lot more than that. And what came across to me, Martin, was your enthusiasm for what you're doing. But I think also that you see yourself as part of a community, that you're not just the network. You spoke very touchingly, really, about how you want to help everyone learn together and particularly help people get through difficulties. And I was really touched by that. And finally, on the very end, well, not finally, really, but on the very end, Tim Williams, who is another Kiwi. And I knew it wouldn't be long, but running Rootstock, that we would have some Kiwi accents in the room. And I've known Tim for a while, I suppose 6 or 7 years. He brought his knowledge of regen systems to Devon from New Zealand and hot-tailed it to Rothamsted to ask if we knew anything about soil. And I think that was the beginning of my experience of working with farmers to understand what is an extremely complex system. And I've thoroughly enjoyed my interactions with Tim, and I have learned a lot about farming, and I hope that he has learned a little bit about soil microbiology in return. So how we're going to do this, we're going to have some talks, and then I want to try and encourage, before you get stuck in, I want to try and encourage a little bit of cross-disciplinary discussion with the panel, and then we will open it up to the floor if we have, well, not if we have the time, but we will have the time to do that. So, without further ado, Sasha Mooney is going to talk about soil in reduced disturbance systems. Is that right?
That is right. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, the lights are bright when you're up here. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation. I had hoped to be with you last year, but my gallbladder had other ideas about that. So it's great to actually be here today. So I'm a soil scientist, and as a scientist, we like to talk about hypotheses. And so the hypothesis for what I'm going to talk to you about this morning is about soil structure, a property which I think is the most important of all our properties, which is absolutely vital for sustainable management of soils. And because the way we've organised this session, this is going to be a very sort of short talk to sort of present this hypothesis to you, and I'd be delighted to answer some questions about that when we have our discussion. So, just as a very sort of quick warm-up, though, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement. So this gentleman is somebody that many of you in the room may not recognise, but is actually, I think, a really unknown great British hero. So this is Sir Godfrey Hounsfield, and he's the inventor of X-ray computed tomography. Most of you will know this better as CAT scanning. So hopefully you haven't had a CAT scan, because it usually means that you're not too well, but if you have, this is a 3D X-ray. So most hospitals have these, and these are used extensively, obviously, in medical diagnostics every day all around the world, but they're also used extensively in research, particularly in material and engineering sciences, but also in soil sciences. So Sir Godfrey was an amazing guy. He lived in Nottinghamshire, so that's our connection at Nottingham. We have a research facility called the Hounsfield facility, named after Sir Godfrey. Not only was he the inventor of X-ray computed tomography, he was involved in the development of the world's first computers. He was also involved in the development of radar, so a really incredible guy. And why this technology is so useful is because what it provides for us is a three-dimensional visualization, i.e. undisturbed. And this is really important for soils because when we take them from the field and when we start to smash them up in sieves and do experiments in pots and columns, we lose that really important soil structure. And it also works very well because an X-ray provides you with a map of density, so a map of density of the materials. And soil is full of materials of all different densities. So we can use X-ray computed tomography to get this undisturbed view of what the soil looks like beneath our feet. And that's what I'm going to try to show you today and explain why that is so important. So at Nottingham, we have a facility called the Hounsfield facility where we have several of these X-ray computed tomography scanners that allow us to get this unprecedented view of soils that we can do from the perspective of microbes and worms, etc. So this is what the soil beneath our feet might look like. This is a core that we've taken from the experimental farm at Nottingham. And what we can do is we can actually look at the structure of the soil as it exists in reality. We can look at the network of pores, and we can also do this at multiple scales. So here we take a tiny soil aggregate, and we look at the connection and the size of all of those individual pores, and that enables us to start making useful observations of soil in terms of how, for example, soils wet up, how they infiltrate, how they store carbon, how they facilitate the soil fauna. So this view that we get of the ground beneath our feet, we can only do using this technology, but it's starting to open up doors for us in terms of our understanding of soil behavior. So I'd like to give you one example of how we've utilized this recently, looking at zero tillage. So at the University of Nottingham, we have a zero till trial. It's about 10 years old now. And what you can see are two cores that have been taken from the field, one where the soil has been cultivated every year, one where the soil has been left undisturbed for 10 years. And the red that you can see is the pore space, okay? This is the network through which everything takes place, the gaseous movement, the water, etc. And what you can see is that those networks are very, very different. On the right-hand side, you can see the cultivated soil. There's lots of red, lots of porosity. It looks like it's a little bit more ordered. Whereas on the left-hand side, under the zero till, you can see that there's a lot less of the red, but it appears different. It has more connections that you can visualize. And what's really important for undertaking studies of this kind is that the soils in these images that you can see are separated just by a couple of meters. Okay, so it's the exact same soil type, exact same geology underneath, exact same climate, exact same cropping patterns. And that's really essential if we want to look at the differences with management, because soils are incredibly heterogeneous, especially over short distances. So this project extended across the East Midlands with a network of farmers undertaking zero tillage and neighbours who were taking conventional tillage. And we undertook these measurements of structure. And what we found was that over time, this network that started to develop under zero till started to cause the soils to behave in a different way. And particularly, the key property that we're measuring from these cores, the connection of the pores, enabled the soils to behave really quite well when it came to things like hydraulic function. So after 10 years, the infiltration in this column on the left has very similar properties to the soil on the right-hand side, despite there being less of that pore space. So this is just another visualization to show you that in a little bit more detail. We have an example of a conventionally tilled soil where you can see these pores that are rounded. They look like fluffy clouds. And on the left-hand side, you see these pores that have been created. In this case, this is a worm channel. And if we look at this over time, on the graph, I've plotted the detectable porosity, so that's all of the pores, alongside the surface-connected pore space. That's those pores most important for infiltration. You can see in the cultivated soil, there's a lot of pores, but only a small amount of them are connected. Whereas if we compare that to the soil under zero till, 5 years zero till, very low porosity, very low connection. 6 to 10 years, more porosity and more connection. And 11 to 15 years, you can see the red on the right-hand side, the red square, is twice that of the cultivated soil. So in 10 years, we have a soil that has twice the connection. And that connection really is absolutely crucial for all of those transport processes. So that's really, really interesting in terms of how this natural soil structure is evolving and what it means for how the soil's then going to subsequently function. We then looked at greenhouse gas emissions from those same soils. And what we found was really quite interesting. So the fact that they have these connected pore spaces, and when we measured the carbon dioxide and the nitrous oxide and the methane, and brought all those together to calculate the global warming potential, which was mentioned this morning from Michael, you can see a quite significantly reduced global warming potential from the zero-till soils, about 30% in total. And again, if we plot this over time, you can see that the gap between the cultivated soil and the zero-till is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So why is that happening? What's happening to the soil structure that's driving that change? So to look at that, we had to look at a slightly higher resolution than the cores that I mentioned. We had to sort of go down to a finer scale of resolution. And the way we did that is to look at the aggregates, and in particular, those very, very small aggregates. So alongside that, we measured the carbon in the soil. And again, here you can see differences 1 to 5 years zero till, 6 to 10 years zero till, 11 to 15 years. And if you focus just on the topsoil, so this is the depth of the soil from the top going down to 50 centimeters in this case, small differences in 1 to 5 years, but by the time we get to 6 to 10, clear differences, increased carbon in the upper 20 centimeters, and 11 to 15 years, even greater. Now, this is quite controversial. If you look at the literature, many people believe that the role of zero tillage in carbon has perhaps been overstated. There are some important considerations. You must remember when you're making comparisons between cultivated soil and zero-till soil that the bulk densities are different, so you need to make sure that you correct for that. But I think one of the reasons why we find these changes in this particular study in the East Midlands is that all of the samples that we compared were only separated by a couple of meters from each other. So everything had been controlled with the exception of the management. And I think if you were to try and undertake a different study where you compare farms, where different farms from different geographical locations, under different systems, under different soil types, then it's quite likely you would just be introducing lots of noise in the system and it'd be quite hard to see these differences. So to drill down further, what is actually happening at these smaller scales to the carbon and to the greenhouse gas emissions, we had to go to this finer scale of soil, and this required us to go to Brazil. The PhD student involved at the time, a lady called Hannah Cooper, who's now an academic at Nottingham, was very pleased by this because she got the opportunity to get some air miles and go to the other side of the world. And she had this nice transect from the top of Brazil down to the bottom, where she compared these paired systems, okay, different soil types, but these paired systems, and scanning at much, much higher resolution. So these little aggregates you can see that are being held there, they're just a couple of millimeters in size. And when we start to look at the pores inside these aggregates, these are just a few microns in size. And we have the comparison of a ploughed aggregate versus one under 2 years zero-till, a ploughed versus 15, and then a ploughed versus 30 years. And what you can see, other than that in the zero-till, the aggregates are starting to change in their shape, you can see a clear difference in the porosity, in this case is yellow, between the ploughed and the zero-till. So the ploughed soils, the aggregates are quite porous. In this case, the microbes are able to access the carbon that's inside those aggregates. They're quite aerated. In these smaller aggregates, the carbon that exists in here is there under very, very different conditions. The soil is much denser, there is less pore space, there is less oxidization and predation of the carbon, and that carbon gets to sit there longer. So this is one of our hypotheses for why that carbon is getting stored better under zero-till. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's a graph that shows that for 30 years, the porosity is much, much reduced. So that carbon can get locked in that microstructure, but importantly, the processes that take place in the soil when it's undisturbed create that connected macroporosity that mean that it's also good for infiltration and drainage as well. So there's a two-tier porosity system that's developing, that's associated and managing different functions. Just a sort of a caveat for that, though, we need to remember that under zero tillage, these pore systems are changing dynamically. They're changing rapidly over time. Going back to the farm at Sutton Bonington in Nottingham, you can see the difference here between ploughed and zero-till soils in terms of the pore thickness. And on the right-hand side, 10 years zero-till, we're noticing we're getting much, much thicker pores, and those thicker pores are facilitating greater transport. So in this case, we've done a chemical breakthrough curve of chloride, and you can see the detection in the blue was much rapid in the zero tillage. So that's a bit of a warning that we need to remember that these structures are dynamic, they're changing. There might be benefits for reducing carbon emissions, but there could also be consequences for leaching if we have these pathways to flow which enhance that. Okay, so the meeting's called Rootstock. What about roots? Let me switch tack a minute and say, how do we do this? So one thing is that we can use our X-ray tomography system to also visualize the roots in the soil. It's not as easy because the density of roots in soil is quite similar to all the other organic material. So we have to use AI, which everyone does now. So the cool thing, we use AI and we can extract these maps of the roots. What is the use of that? Well, recently, a colleague of mine, Bipin Pandey at Nottingham, has been using this ability to look at roots growing in soils to look at the response of roots to compaction. And he had noticed in growing plants in non-soil systems, so in agar, that the response of soil, of roots when they hit a hard substrate is to slow down, which we know in response to mechanical stress. But if we were able to control the release of ethylene, which is one of the hormones that roots release as they penetrate through the soil, if we could switch that mechanism off, then the roots can continue growing. So he had this idea, is this a way to potentially think about compaction busting plants in the future? So we went and tried this in some soil columns, and this is just an example for rice. The different colors you can see here are all the different pore spaces in terms of different sizes, and you can see on the left-hand side a wild-type system versus one where we've switched ethylene off. This is low bulk density soil, so the roots grow really well regardless, but when we swap to high density soil, you can see that the roots will stop growing in the wild type, but will continue growing in the ethylene insensitive plant. So this is really interesting. Does that mean there is this possibility of allowing plants to grow under much harder soil conditions than what they are currently growing? We had a look to see what the reason for this might be, and again, it all comes back to the structure of the soil. So on the left-hand side, we have a loose, porous soil, And what's happening is that the ethylene is diffusing into the pore space, it's disappearing, so the plant's not picking up any signal that the soil is compacted or it should continue growing. On the right-hand side, where the soil's compacted, that ethylene builds up into high concentrations, the root gets that signal, ethylene is high, and it switches off. So if we can change that, then we're able to get to that point where we might be able to generate a plant that can thrive under harder soil conditions, such as zero-till. So this has now left the lab. We have a field trial that's just gone in this year in Lincolnshire, where we're looking at wheat to see do we have lines where we can switch off ethylene and able to soil to grow under those harder conditions. So scaling up to the field is quite a big challenge. We have to take really, really big cores and scan them at slightly coarser resolutions. But it's not surprising that what we find is that the effect of the soil is really, really important. Here's a map, it's a graph showing you the macroporosity with depth, and you can see that it drops quite massively. We know that soil gets denser as we go deeper, but it correlates almost perfectly with root number. Where do we see the roots when we go below 50 centimeters? We see them in all the biopores. So this is an X-ray image where you can see the arrows. It's showing you where the pores are. So this, I think, it's my final point really, is that we really need to think about how our future plants are going to grow in our future soils. If our future soils are going to be managed very different, our future plants are going to have to adapt to that. And we recently did a little bit of research into this and discovered that in the last century, there's been about 300,000 papers that have looked at plant breeding. And of that 300,000 papers, less than 5% have considered soil. And of that 5% that have considered soil, 0.1% have considered soil physical properties like structure, compaction, and density. So this is an urgent call. We need to start informing our plant breeders and our crop scientists about how soils are going to be changing over time and what that will mean for future plant growth and production. Okay, so this is all the people that have contributed to this. It's Valentine's Day. Soil scientists like to tell everyone to love soil, but actually you can see that our soils already love us. We've got love heart aggregates. And so with that, I will say thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sasha. And you've provided me a perfect excuse of why we need to go to South America so often, is that there are actually some very long experiments in South America that are looking at some of the problems that we are starting to think as challenges in the UK. So South America has a lot of very useful resources for us to understand soil about. So that's my excuse, and probably yours as well. Right, let's go, Kelly. Tell us about beetles.
Right. Hello, I'm thrilled to be here today to talk to you a little bit about beneficial insects in the farm landscape. And as David Attenborough says, they're the little things that run the world. So they're kind of running farming systems. So we're thinking of ecosystem services, which is the benefits that people get from nature. So pollination gets a big rap in the media for insects. It's not all bees, though. It is flies, butterflies, even beetles. Pest and weed control is one of those things that farmers are quite aware of. The range of insects that do this is quite astounding, though, from hoverflies to flies to beetles to spiders. And nutrient cycling and soil structure, as we touched on with Sasha's talk there, it's very important, and there's a range of invertebrates that do these services within farm systems. And they're really creating that kind of linkages, those pore spaces. They're moving around in the soil, moving things around so that plants can grow better. So that's why we're very interested in them in terms of sustainable yield. And when we're looking at kind of farm systems, we have to think about how insects are very different to us. So they don't just start out life like we do, like little people that grow into big people. They start as eggs, and a lot of times, so I'm using beetles as an example because beetles are awesome. So not all insects do this kind of life cycle, but beetles particularly go from eggs to larvae to pupa to adults. And those different life stages need different things to survive. So it needs a whole farm landscape often with different habitats in juxtaposition to each other. So we need these kind of margin habitats, wildflower, close to the fields, because what we're assuming is a spillover of insects into these disturbed environments that crops kind of represent. So my PhD thesis was in carabid beetles because they are so amazing for ecosystem service provision to farmers particularly. That in all environments around the world, there's around 40,000 species worldwide, 350 species in the UK, 30 of which are common in farmland. And I'm not going to read all that information out to you, but I like to call them the hyenas of the beetle world. They are the scavengers in these systems. They go around and they pretty much nibble on anything that they can find that is a food resource in fields, including my finger when I pick them up often. So a lot of people don't also realise that they eat weed seeds, up to 40,000 weed seeds per metre squared per day. They've worked that out by lab feeding studies. But I want to just highlight to you that biodiversity, those around 30 species that are mentioned in farm habitats, are all very different, from their tolerances to the way that they predate on different things, from slugs down to cabbage stem flea beetles, all in different ways. The ways they move around the farm are very different. So to ensure that we have a stability of these services that they are providing, we need biodiversity. Now, I mentioned that spillover effect, and that was what I was taught to in the literature when I started my PhD, that we would have these semi-natural environments, such as field margins, such as hedges, and then we'd get less beetles towards the crop centre, where we really need them to be. But the first big piece of work I did, I'm not going to talk all through this, I would be happy to talk about it at length later if you want to ask me about it, but that disproved this kind of spillover effect. You can see that most of the beetles in this big data set were in the centre, in sugar beet, and there was particularly one species, which is a really nice predatory species. But you can see that when we split that down, the distinctions between what different species are doing in different crops and in different distances into the field is quite distinct. And my other big piece of work was on our large-scale rotation experiment, where we had tillage treatments. And if I looked at all those beetles in a pooled data set, I wouldn't see any difference in what all of those beetles were doing by tillage. When I split it to a species level, some beetles were actually affected by tillage, particularly the big carabus species, which are slug predators, which is really good news for people implementing zero tillage. Interestingly, the carabid larvae, which live in the soil and perhaps are going to be very affected by tillage, didn't see that effect. But I think that was because the experiment had only been established a couple of years by the time I sampled from it. So we didn't have that kind of generational build-up of the carabid larva in the soil environment. But the key thing here was that the barley undersown with grass, when I looked at it with subterranean trapping, actually had more larvae than all of the other treatments by far. And I think that's to do with the way that the soil environment is affected by those roots, that different rooting structure and that diverse microbiome within that. So it is thinking about the structure and the resources in the middle of the crops that's keeping the beetles there, that's keeping them breeding, that's increasing the survivorship of the beetles where we want them to be, because the larvae are actually more predatory than the adults because they need protein for growth, so we want them there. My big experiment at Rothamsted was at a farm scale, so I mentioned that the different kinds of habitats across the farm is important. I had a lot of experimental margins. I was looking at the spillover effect from those margins into the field, and I was back into the adjacent habitats, because I wanted to really figure out what was behind that kind of margins and the spillover effect into fields. What I found was quite surprising, that where there was a grass margin, in the transect position that was next to it, so that place where we'd expect to see the spillover from that grass margin into the field, there was actually less carabid beetles. So it was almost as if those grass margins was acting as a barrier in some places. And we had wildflower margins. I expected there to be tons of beetles in there. But actually, that was the place where there was less beetles in the actual margins when they were wildflower margins. And I think that has to do with the kind of dense environment that it encompasses, the movement of the caribids within that environment, and the resources being better for caribids in the field centres. That's not to say that margins are not good for predators. Then perhaps not as good as for caribid beetles as assumed previously, but they are good for a lot of the range of that first slide I showed you with like spiders, flies, and predatory insects as well. So I just wanted to know a bit more about field margins, but the landscape context in with that is important. And the in-field habitats is what I want to talk to you about today, because that is the thing that's going to be driving keeping them in the field centres, and it's also important for regenerative agriculture. So I really need to know a bit more about that. So how do I go about doing that? Well, the big Ag Zero project that we're doing at Rothamsted at the moment, we've got a lot of different partners. We're looking at kind of farm labs where we are testing our experiments very distinctly, a lot of data from there. We're working with innovation farms around that, where we're going to farm sites and sampling from them and finding out what's happening with these innovative farm practices. But the most kind of data that I really want to get is from all across the country, from different farms, different contexts, different kind of innovative practices, huge data set to really find out what's going on. So what I did was I made a caribid ID guide. I have a few copies for anyone who's super interested in beetles today. Come and get a copy from me. And a protocol that's quick and easy for farmers to do. And I ran that with some pilot farmers. Everyone really enjoyed it. Got the kids involved. A lot of farmers from all across the country came to me asking to be part of it. And they found it easy and were able, key, to get to a species level. I verified these, and farmers were able to do this themselves, to identify beetles themselves. And moreover, they were interested in it. They really wanted to know what was going on in their farms, so they were engaged with this. And they were seeing the same thing as me, more beetles in the centre, key predatory species. We've paired this now with an app that CEH has developed with us, and we're going to get some images working towards automatic identification so that we can build those tools for farmers to practice adaptive management, find out what's going on in their own farm environments, because so many farmers talk to me and have been talking to me saying that they really want to know what's going on when they implement these regenerative practices. I've been listening to all the farmers today and I've been like, oh, I must know what's going on with the beetles in their systems. And this enables me to perhaps pick that apart. So when we've got an automatic identifier, it makes it even quicker and easier for farmers to get involved. The other thing, quickly touching on dung beetles, but they deserve a whole talk in of themselves because dung beetles are so amazing. They're super beautiful and cute, but also they can save the UK cattle industry up to 367 million a year. That was calculated in 2015, so it's probably even more now. And they do that by the way that they act within dung. So I know someone will be very interested in seeing this picture of dung here. And the way that they do this is they eat the soil from within with dweller species. And so that removes the environments for pest flies, for worms to live in pastures. But they also, some of the species, the tunnelers, they take down that into the soil, look at those beautiful pore spaces, and take those nutrients down, create that space, and kind of help the sward to be better. And that's quantifiable. There's been a lot of research that has shown that they reduce greenhouse gas emissions and they help the sward to be more healthy and sustainable. So I've been working with Andy Gray on his silver pasture treatment with a project called Silvobio. Now, we go out there as Rothamsted, and I have my technicians, some of whom are in the crowd, hi, and I get them sifting through dung. They were a bit apprehensive at first, but they really took to it. It's really fun. It's like a treasure hunt. And I also, it is, try it. And I also do baited pitfall traps to catch beetles that are flying past. But that takes a lot of time for me to set up those traps, for people to go through a 20-minute hand sift of dung. What if we could do it easier? So if we can set up camera traps that see what's coming into dung piles, automatically identify it, that is so much easier for farmers to get involved with and measure the different kinds of things such as mob grazing, such as herbal lays, what impacts that's having on the dung beetles in different systems. We're particularly interested in silver pasture because of the ways that the trees interact with the ways that beetles move in the landscape. So fingers crossed we'll get some really useful data from that soon. But it's enabling farmers to really get in there and look at this. So that's under development at the moment. We've found out some really interesting things about beetle behaviour by camera trapping that we didn't really know before, because who watches a pile of dung for 3 days straight?
Not even you.
Oh, well, I had to sift through all the images, so basically I did. But really interesting. So we will be publishing that research this year, so watch this space on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kelly. You didn't disappoint. And I have to say, I've set myself a long-term project, which is every time I see Kelly, I say, you really should be moving down to Northwick. And I've told her that the farmers I've met in the southwest are so much cooler than any of the farmers I met when I was working in Hertfordshire. So you need to take part in this citizen science to help me persuade her that this is where she needs to be. Anyway, so please help me out. Next, I have Martin Lines, who's going to talk, well, about your own farm, but the role that it plays in the farmer-friendly farming network. Farmer-friendly. Nature-friendly farming. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, and hello to all. It's great to see a good room full, and thanks for the opportunity and invite to come down. I just put a title up, Nature-Friendly Farming, Improving the Farm's Bottom Line, Biodiversity, Carbon Footprints on your farms. We're running businesses, and we've got to focus around getting the business opportunity from that, but recognising nature and other bits within it. So on our own farm, 165 hectares, family farm, third generation. We're also tenants, contract farmers. We do contract services for everybody else. In the past, the focus post-war was all about food production, move nature out of the way and concentrate on food production. And actually, we went down that road for many years and increased production at a detriment to our soil and our environment around us, and actually detriment to our bank balance, because that constant buying in products depleted our bank balance. When I really started to look at that and had discussions with my father several years ago, typical father-son relationship, there's a bit of friction going on. Most of what we were producing wasn't food. Most of what we currently produce as farmers isn't really food. It's food for livestock or energy plants, 1.5 million tonnes going into ethanol, maize for anaerobic digestion. We're an asset manager of natural capital producing goods and services society wants. That's food, energy, fibre, public access, water storage. And if we think in a bigger holistic way, we can look at our landscape and see how much productivity and production. So my focus now is to produce as much as possible for the best margin as possible for all the goods and services society wants from us. And how much do I fit that in my farm? If I came here, because I'm in Cambridgeshire, your goods and services maybe can be completely different. So there's nobody can come and tell you what to do, certainly not me, but we can look at what we can produce. So I'm trying to stack as many enterprises as best we can. We've had to change our farming arrangements the last few years. BPS is gone, or going. We've had to decouple the value of that from our rent, where we rent. Our landlord's not been very keen on that idea, but we've driven those rents down. We now get paid SFI. They trying to get a bit of that value. But also our contract farms arrangements are incentivising us to grow crops or farm it all, where the reality is some of the areas we don't really want to farm, we lose money by doing it. So we move those into share farm agreements so we can balance off the risk and the balance as we go forward. As a farmer, some of my core business costs are maintaining the environment. Previously, that hasn't been respected by the commodities that we produce. They drive down the price of the grain that we produce. The cost of maintaining the environment was cost to my business. So we've been in stewardship schemes for over 20 years. You could call this a livestock fence or recycling pallets. But if I go to government and say that's environmental protection fence, I'll now get paid for that. So we think about how we farm and what we want to achieve and how the public may support us in the future. We need to refocus our language. We put a lot of new hedges in. In the past, we took a lot of hedges out and we put 5 kilometres of new hedgerows in. In the spring and summer, they're my vertical flower margins now, full of pollinators and predatory insects. We cut them every 2 to 3 years, so we have a life cycle. Hopefully, we heard earlier, to give nature a life cycle. Don't take it all away. All the watercourses have got buffers. Don't go and cut them all the time. Let the creepy crawlies go and live in there. Every time I'm a farmer, they're creepy crawlies, they're little bugs. I've learned a lot the last 10 years. I need to work with scientists and conservation groups. Every time we start a tractor up, my little tractor costs me £52 an hour. Why do I want to mow everything every year? As long as it's, if it's a bit scruffy, it doesn't really matter, as long as it's not interrupting what I'm doing. So we always leave edges of ditches. But I've been trying to understand, that's great, but the nature that lives in there, what value is it to me? What can I do? I also love my tech and data. If I'm going to do something, I need to prove why we're doing it. Can't just do it because it's the love of fun. We've mapped all our fields. Nutrient only gets placed where it's needed. We used to broadcast it across the whole field. That saved us about £8,000 a year in cutting fertiliser costs. Simple technology. We zoned all the fields. These are all the different soil maps within a field. Fields have loads of different soils in. We always just thought they're the same. So we can adjust the seed rates. So where we know we have compaction or a weed issue or something else, we can up the seed rates and balance that out across the farm. The middle two pictures there are the yield maps off the combine. I found those are the best thing we ever put on the combine. They're really easy to interpret. Green is usually a profit and red is usually a loss. Why do we carry on farming the green bits? If we can't improve it, take it out of production. Average yields go up, costs go down. And we've found real benefits out. And it makes me think, what can I do with those areas across the farm that I'm taking out of production, squaring fields up? We also use biomass imagery. Satellites are coming over. We can have a look at the field. So instead of walking all the field, we can just go to the bits that look different. Why is that bit different to that bit? We start to understand what's going on. So I say we've been in stewardship. We've been taking out the awkward corners and the unproductive areas, shaded sides of woods, putting different habitats in. And for me, the journey really started to understand what was in those habitats, what pollinators, predatory insects. If I'm going to sow a flower margin, I want one that's going to boost my yield as much as possible, pollinate my crops, or host the most predatory insects. By understanding what goes in there, we stopped using insecticides 9 years ago. We had a flower margin beside some beans that were full of aphids. We couldn't spray for 10 days because it was wet and windy. Father told me we're going to lose the crop. That was it. It's all disaster. I was a lazy tyke. Should have gone out. 10 days later, went to look at the crop. Beside those flower margins, all the aphids are gone. All I found was ladybirds and hoverflies. So we really had to start understanding the benefit of those margins and the benefit of what we do. So we can move away from insecticides, fit them in. And we also put them, this is like one of the local villages, put the flower margins up beside them. Let the public see what we're up to. We put them down the bridleways. I'm fed up with people walking their dogs, across the fields. Put a flower margin or birdseed mix, create a habitat beside them. It keeps them out. They don't want to walk on the flowers. They'll walk on the crop. But it's this mentality. If the dog's on the loose, you don't go and challenge them anymore. I just video them, put them on a social media page, say how disappointed I am seeing this dog chasing wildlife. The people in the village know who that dog is. I don't have to say a word. They're on my side now, and it's how do we approach it. So our farming journey has gone on quite a way. We on heavy 65% clay content, really heavy clay. We used to plough everything. Some people believe that's the tool of the devil. Plough, you can't possibly do that. The right tool in the right place for the right outcome, we can accept some disturbance. Our soils are heavy. We, like many, ploughed within the furrow. So tractors got bigger, ploughs got bigger. We filled the tyres up with water, put another weight on the front. Don't recommend this and don't suggest it to anyone. I was setting someone up ploughing who said the plough was broken many years ago. What the reality was, he couldn't drive straight. It was nothing wrong with the plough. But I was really lazy. I sat on the back of, it wasn't this plough, sat on the back of the plough on the beam, riding back up the field. I got fed up walking up and down. As your soil turns over, as you look down, the tread print from the 2 years before when we ploughed it in the furrow were laid in the bottom. We covered it up with nice loose soil. The top looked lovely. The compaction and damage we're doing in our soil fields becoming wetter, tighter. We're buying a bigger machine, moving more soil. It really unlocked the thinking that actually we are causing many of our own problems. And actually, if we stop causing it, we don't have to fix it. So we ploughed on top. We went to a disc-tine cultivator, bit of a different machine, but why move soil if there's no compaction? If there's no compaction, why put all that metal in the ground and burn diesel? And how do we focus? So we went on a journey. the far picture there, we created lovely stale seed beds, went across with a great drill, the Vardstad drill, but then it moved all the soil. So all the weeds suddenly germinated behind the seed again after we drilled. So then we ended up buying more chemistry to kill the weeds. So I started on a journey of finding low disturbance drills, and we found a drilling system that slot the seed in, no soil moved, a lot less weed germination because it's already been germinated before. We ended up with a drill. My father was very concerned that if we didn't move soil, back in the 80s when he tried direct drilling for several years, the soil slumped. There's no humus, no biomass. So we got into cover crops. And the diverse mixes we grow, as diverse as possible, many different species, understanding how many weeks they'll be in. 10 weeks, 3 months, 6 months. We also, within our drill, we've got a crimp roller on the front, because I'm very conscious that if we go down the cover crop route, that kind of ties us to glyphosate, and I do not want to be tied to any one product. I need to understand that having a system built around one product, nature will make it fall over. But what we found, we got a crimp roller on the front, and it can terminate some of the cover crops. It's not perfect. But if you walk across a cultivated field, you leave footprints. We drive on routes now, and it's like a sponge. It holds the weight of the machines off and stops the compaction. And it's re-understanding and sort of re-engineering what we're doing. So where possible, we try and drive on routes. Huge economic cost of changing the system. But for me, all these other benefits are really the bits that I was really keen to understand. But I need evidence, I need data. So we've significantly slashed our costs. And significantly, it's over 60% of our diesel was taken away. So really that's money in my pocket. The fuel company that used to supply me most of the fuel, the end of the autumn, come up, I met him in the yard, and he was, "What have I done? Why have I upset you?" I'm like, "What do you mean? You've only had a couple of lorry loads this autumn. Oh, we used to have deliveries every 10 days. And I'm like, "Who are you buying it from?" "I'm not. I've just stopped buying it." "Well, what are you doing?" I told them what we're doing. "Well, that's not going to do me any good, is it?" And I'm like, "I don't really care, but it's doing me wonders." So to understand the soil health, I really needed to think about it a little bit different. Because we've got the cover crops in, I don't like sheep, they just want to die or run away. But a shepherd really wants, a new entrant wanted to grow a business, so we've given him access to our cover crops and our herbal lays. And the fertiliser is better out the bum than the bag. I want to stop buying it in, I want to build it in the soil. Having those sheep in are giving me about 20 to 40 kilos of nitrogen from their back ends, plus from the cover crops. But when is it going to get released? How do I build a really good system around it? So we started doing soil samples down to a metre, 90 centimetres, 30 centimetre profiles in the spring. That field had 207 kilos of nitrogen available in the soil. The industry tells me I need 220 to grow a crop. Why do I want to buy any? So this is what we started to understand. Building soil health up, getting the system and the biology working, was feeding our soil, which gives me enough nutrients. So this field had no nitrogen applied on it 2 years ago. It looked really sick compared with my neighbours, dark green, really lush. When we did some tissue analysis, there was plenty of nitrogen in the crop, but it was really short on zinc, boron and manganese. So we gave it as a vitamin pill. We did a trace element spray. Cost me about £12, I think it was. Our crop went dark green again. We've normalised ourselves on a system, and how do we work with scientists and data to understand the system we can build and what does good look like in a regenerative system with lower inputs and getting the health of our soil and our plants working really well. This sort of backs up the last speaker, actually. We've got trying to understand the benefits of those habitats around the field. I've seen some things, but how can I tell my father this is a good thing? He held the checkbook until he died, so he was always in control. So getting involved in a whole number of different trials, we started to work out, seeing by their trial system, the benefits. Where we got blank canvas, not much benefit. Habitat around the edges, which we've kind of been doing, but that was a benefit. Putting habitat within approximately 100 metres. You saw some slides earlier. Stuff doesn't always move as widely as what you can. Treatment 2, around the outside. Treatment 3, we've seen 18% net yield benefits. Reduction in costs in herbicides, and we don't use insecticides. We only used 1 or 2 bags of slug pellets this last winter, where my neighbours have been on 4 times, so my agronomist tells me, and they still lost their wheat. We've got enough good stuff in the ground. My agronomist now has to look for in autumn for beetles. Don't worry about the slugs so much. What's creeping and crawling? How many ladybirds and hoverflies are they seeing in the summer that'll eat my aphids? So it's having an understanding of actually how it all works. So, so on our farm, I've redesigned our farm landscape. Our little fields, 1 or 2 acres have been put just into habitat. The 10 to 12 acre fields, we put in a 6 metre strip in. And the bigger fields, my biggest machine's 30 metres. So every 1,920 metres, we're putting a 6 metre margin in, 1 metre tussocks grass, 4 metres of flowers. Biodiversity, life's in the middle of the field. It can translate and move around, but it's also in the soil. So when we are doing operations and disturbance, it hasn't got far to go. So we can make, if you've got little fields, it's edges, and we take out all the unproductive corners and all the hassle. And we're really making our whole system. So we put stewardship involved, capital payments, productivity and technology grants. Private finance is the one I'm getting really excited about. We're getting supply chains that I'm selling grain to, pay me premiums for doing regenerative practices that government are also paying me as well. So cover crops, so we are stacking enterprises and opportunities. And there may be an opportunity for biodiversity net gain, but I'm not sure how that works. For me, it's how do we make a business and how do I help communicate this to farmers? So the network was created 6 years ago to bring farmers together to share information and knowledge. It's a UK-wide organisation, very farmer-based, to really help each other. Every farm is different. Every business is different. Nobody can come and tell you what to do, but we can all share what we're doing good. But the most important is share what we're failing, because that's the easiest way to help others not do that. And together we can do that. So that's what I'll finish on and just say thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. You had 20 seconds left. It was perfect. And I should say, one of the reasons why I was so enthusiastic about getting involved with rootstock last year was, as a scientist, I can lose myself continually in the wonder of soil as a system, and I kind of pat myself on the back about how clever I am to study systems in that way. But then I come here and I'm always in awe of how you and your peers and colleagues and everyone in the room can manage a system that's so big and so important and make it look easy. And I'm sure it's not easy, but when you present it like that, it all makes perfect sense. But I think that's why it's important to have scientists in the room, because we're learning that stuff from you. And that's the sort of stuff I've learned from Tim as well. So now I'm sure we're going to get more of the same about how to manage complex systems. I keep telling Tim, I haven't seen many herbal lays, and I'm no herbal lay specialist, but in my eyes, Tim's are some of the best I've ever seen, and I know we've got some pictures of them, so that I haven't set you up here, have I?
No, cool. Thanks, Andy, and thanks for the invitation. I've just got back from 2 months in New Zealand, so sorry guys, it was quite nice over there, hence the tan. It's lovely being back and flying into Heathrow last Thursday, and my son opened the blinds and all you could see was just this rain coming in. So I can sense your pain a little bit. So I'm a farmer, first and foremost. My background is predominantly livestock management. Somehow I've been shoehorned into this sort of arable, I'm a bit of a novice arable farmer. We played around with arable, but yeah, largely working with livestock management, sort of working within the realms of regenerative systems here and back in New Zealand from, I don't know, last 10 years or so. Actually, Silas, who was up before, I was his predecessor at English Farm, which is quite fun. But apparently there's quite a few since then. But yeah, so working within regenerative systems, and then a few years ago, I got invited to talk at a conference down at Baconic. I was managing a farm in New Zealand at the time, quite a large-scale regenerative system. It's about 1,500 acres with several hundred cattle, and quite a simple but complex system of rotational management of about 8 different mobs of cattle. And at this talk in Cornwall, I was sort of keen to come back to the UK for the beautiful weather, obviously, and just cheekily asked if there was anyone in the room not dissimilar to this, if there was anyone who wanted to try this sort of newfangled way of farming. And a couple of people put their hands up. And so I found myself in Cornwall about about 4 years ago now, and taking on this farm as a contract farmer. That contract has ended now, so since the invitation, and now I'm concentrating on studying with Nicole Masters on the CREATE program, which is a deep dive into sort of agroecological systems, sort of regenerative agronomy. Ross is here, he's also laughing, yes. Yeah, so it's a real deep dive into the soil dynamics and amongst other things. So this is Earthbarn Farm. This is kind of what I started out with. An old quad bike, a dog, and some fencing equipment. So I came into this farm, and this is kind of what greeted me. So you can see here, straw on the surface that's probably been there for about 3 or 4 months, not decomposing. This is a typical sort of Cornish potato field, harvested late in the autumn and then just left over winter, unfortunately. So there's a lot of runoff. Obviously, structurally, it's there's not a lot of pore space there. And just, it was quite a sort of a sad state of affairs, but I took it on, and I kind of took it on with the purpose of proving a regenerative system, because I've sort of been in this realm for a while now, and I know it works, and I just wanted to have a piece of ground that I could experiment on with some sort of anecdotal ideas that I had, some few hypotheses around changing the soil dynamics based on sort of past experiences and a bit of research. So how do you bring this sort of land? I guess I landed on the farm, and the owner of the farm, this is about 4 years ago in the winter, and he said to me, what do you see as you come onto the farm? And to me, it just felt dead, like there's no life. It was an arable farm. It's been arable probably for about 20 or 30 years. Conventional, quite intensive system. And there's just no life. It was winter as well, but there was just no zing to it. And so how do you go about reintroducing that life? And I know this is a chat about low input arable systems. So how do we create a low input arable system? And to me, soil is soil is soil. It doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing. It's still the same principles apply. So the first, here's some more devastating soil. So the first idea was to introduce complexity into the system. So complexity, above ground diversity, sort of creates below ground diversity. And so this here is what I classify as a setup mix. So come in the autumn, so after harvest, direct drill this into the standing stubble, and it transitions basically from brassicas through the winter, because it's early succession, so you're following the succession of the soil and the development of the soil biology. So as the soil had no biology in it, had no life really, so introducing those brassicas into the system over winter, and then introducing livestock into that system. And then as that evolves, so this is the first summer, so as it evolves, you've got a big flush of plants over winter, and then they get chewed out by livestock, and then you get this flush of annuals. So it was a mix of, I could probably go back to the mix actually. So it was a mix of legumes, brassicas, grasses, herbs, forbs, whatever you want to call them. So this is what I call a multifunctional sward, not a herbal ley. And so each of those plants has a function. So I put this mix together, knowing that each of those plants is then going to have a function within the system. And so it's multifaceted functions, but so things like creating biomass, getting the nitrogen cycle pumping, and then setting up into a perennial system. And in my mind, it was about how do I get this function to work? So I did it the wrong way, I guess. I went cold turkey, and everyone says don't go cold turkey, but I did. But because I was returning it to a livestock system, I felt that I could go cold turkey because there, to me, and coming from an organic perspective, to me, I don't really see the need for fertilisers in a livestock system because you've got everything there in the cycling and the management. And Silas has already shown us that, with good management, you can get your system functioning. So you can see there's a little bit of probably boron deficiency on the clovers in that first year, but the plant was pretty healthy. And then into the second year, so this is the perennial system, so this is the herbal that Andy gets excited about. So these are probably 16, 18 months old cattle. And this is the complex functional sward, not herbal. So lots of perennial things in there, so chicories and lots of different grasses, some sainfoin, lots of herbs, plantain, just basically threw everything at it, shotgun approach. And the idea is that each plant finds its niche. And so you get this community of plants that actually, we drilled this across, over the 2 years, 300 acres. So each plant finds its different niche, and you'll see different fields will take on a different plant population. It's, it's quite interesting. So then, again, mob stocking, classic sort of regenerative system, but with an eye on how to get the functionality back into the soil. So I really like playing around with the animals, using them as tools. So not only are we producing a product from beef, but also using these, for me, it was using the livestock as the tool to get this system functioning, to get it back into its those ecological systems working, basically. So in that first year, mob stocking with cattle, running about 150 head, and an adaptive amp grazing system behind electric fences, and playing with the rotations. So here you can see, because it's adaptive and you can change it up depending on what you want to achieve. So if you want to, for me, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but it was about changing the system from a very bacterially dominated soil to a more balanced bacterial to fungal soil. And so to get the fungal community back into that system, they need a different feedstock. So they like the lignified grasses, the slightly more complex carbohydrates. And that's why you want to get that leaf litter onto the ground, basically. And then we're like, okay, we've done the complex herbal layers, functional swords. We've reintroduced livestock, which I think is the trick to an arable system, is reintroducing the livestock. And then we met Bridget and Henry from the Land Gardeners, and Andy.
No, 5 minutes.
Oh, sorry. I'm sure I met you there. And started doing these compost systems. So there's complete microbial composting in windrows, and the idea was to re-engage the biology. So then we played around with using that high-value, complex composting system to bioprime the seed, as and I was talking to Jake about it earlier, as applying, instead of applying fungicides or neonicotinoids or whatever to your seed, is you're actually applying a community of biology to that seed. And again, it's about trying to create that complexity within the system, because once you start changing it and then playing around with compost teas, and compost extracts. This is my version of a tow and fert. It's a little bit cheaper. But the idea is, so that's a 5 mil nozzle, so it's to protect the biology. So the idea is when you're pumping biology into the system is you don't want to damage it. You've got bacteria and fungi, and you've got protozoa in there. So it's about understanding how the biology works, and so we're playing around with applying that as a tea form. And then we sort of got a bit more interested in it, understanding about the bacterial to fungal ratio, so a lot of the work from Elaine Ingham, and then understanding that we need to shift or just build that complexity. And so we're playing around with the microbiometer, although it's quite simplistic. But that knowledge around biological systems is changing in leaps and bounds so rapidly. But you can see here, so Claire's garden, that's my wife's garden, completely off the chart. And that was from mulching. So mulching leaf litter, hay, lawn clippings, bits and bobs on lawn. And that developed a really beautiful fungal to bacterial ratio and microbial content, which was off the chart. So I was like, well, you know, that whole mulching, the mob stocking, that returning of leaf litter to the soil feeds that system, and then we want more complexity into that system. And so then I started playing around with these more complex cover crops. This one here went into quite a field on the farm that I was really, really struggling with. And I subsoiled it and then put this complex. And what you've got here, you've got sunflowers, you've got millets, you've got sorghums. And what they're doing is they're far more carbon heavy. So that's in terms of carbon to nitrogen ratios. The plant material is a lot more carbon heavy, but the exudates these guys pump into the soil are phenomenal. Like you rip up a sorghum plant and just the rhizosheath development on the plant is insane. And it just blew my mind. So this here was flailed and then grazed. I want to try and play around with sort of what I call bio-intensive grazing, but like getting big covers of sort of 5, 6, you know, and even grazing maize and playing around with that and seeing what that does for soil. And then, so why is that important? So this is the field that I showed you. This is after 3 years, the field, the potato field. This is what it looks like today. The pictures on those screens look a lot better. But it's about, so that was a 3-year transition of complete cold turkey using livestock, plants, and biology, basically. And it kind of comes back to what these guys were saying about, you know, the importance of pore space. So by shifting that bacterially dominated soils and encouraging fungal development is actually shifting the structure of your soil through that management just by encouraging that. And what that's doing is it's opening up those pore spaces. So bacteria, as far as I'm aware, create micro aggregates. So you've got these small little aggregates from it. And most nitrogen-heavy soils in the UK will be very bacterial dominant. But once we start opening those up, introducing more fungi into the system, and this is around the min-2 stuff, so not damaging the mycorrhizae. As you develop these more open, structured soils, and that's when they get into the macroaggregation, which is the collection of small microaggregates from the bacteria, then get collected, joined up by the fungi, and those systems become more complex, and then you get a more complex biological system in there. And the beauty of that, if we go back to the net zero thing, is then we start looking at the nutrient cycling. So like nitrogen, a lot of the nitrogen that's tied up in the soil is tied up through biology. And so if we can start increasing those sort of, moving along those trophic levels and get more protozoa and things working in the system, then we can start mobilizing that nitrogen that's locked up. So, you know, you probably 20 or 30%, I don't know what the sort of figures are, but that releases a lot more nitrogen into the system that you're not applying. And then there's things like phosphate and releasing phosphate into the system through the... Wind it up? Okay. Okay. Anyway, and so the more you get into it, it's very, very exciting. Yeah, so that's pretty much me. I'm no longer a contract farmer. I'm now moving more into the transitional, basically helping other people transition their farms into this system, because I've seen it work, I've seen it firsthand. And for me, one of the things that really let me down was not having someone there to bounce ideas off. You know, it's like there's a lot of questions around where do I begin? There's a lot of information flying around, and it's like, well, how do we begin? What are the steps that we take to start that journey? And so that's what I'm really excited about. That's what I'm learning with Nicole Masters at the moment. Yeah, that's me.
Tim, I didn't really want you to stop talking, but if I don't make you stop, I've got to answer to Mel and Harry, and then I'm in trouble, right? So Before we open the floor to questions, I just wanted to ask the panel one question, and that is that we all in our own ways and at different scales, and I'm coming back to this system question. We all work with systems. Sasha's looking at the way roots explore pore space. Kelly's looking at, the distribution of organisms within a whole landscape. And farmers, you are systems, right? How can we encourage and support each other to do this even more effectively? Because I think we've got stuff to teach each other. And I want to kick off by saying we shouldn't be limiting our imagination. And that's how we can start to understand systems better. So what would you all individually say you have to contribute to others about understanding systems? Anyone?
Go on. For me, I think it's peer-to-peer learning, hearing from other practitioners about what's going on with expert and advice there to answer those tricky questions. Because you can see stuff, but what's that mean? And it's how do we that? And so events like today and getting off your farm and going to hear different voices you may not always agree with, but you can get in it from a different perspective. And hearing other farmers, or for me, it's always about hearing other farmers in what they're doing and the solutions they've found, but also how did they get there? What journey did they take? How can I fast track that in my own situation?
So exploring innovation space is how I think scientists might discuss it. But yes, learning from each other is very important, isn't it? Sasha?
Yeah, I'd just say that traditionally the funding systems for scientists haven't encouraged interdisciplinary research and interaction with farmers and scientists well enough, and that it's a much different landscape now, which is really good. But just for example, I've just sat through the last two talks thinking I've done experiments that have answered some of the questions that you have. And you don't know about them, and I didn't involve farmers in them, and what's going on with that? That's got to end. There's a change in culture. There's great momentum for us to work closer together, but that has to be how we do all of our research going forward, not just some.
I suppose similarly, we have both done, or we have all three of us done experiments that have been of absolutely no use to farmers whatsoever, because we've explored our own interests and not understood the practical issues that you're dealing with. Kelly, have you got something to say?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Oh, wow. Yeah, I think that is a big problem at the moment. And although funding bodies are talking about co-design with farmers, it's almost like an afterthought, even when they talk about that. So you've got to think of an idea first and then co-design it with farmers, which is the complete wrong way around to do it. And then having objectives that you're working to, that stops that kind of innovative process. So we need to find different ways to work with farmers and make it so that it's directed by them, those kind of research questions that they really want to know about and how they're really going to put those into practice on their farms. So the first step in that for me is me attending so many of these events as I can fit in with actually doing other kind of scientific work. To understand farmers' perspectives, how they work with the land and those kind of systems, to try and think about my research from the very start, designing it so it can be implemented.
Yeah, that's a good point. Tim, do you have something to say?
I think it's about getting scientists out onto the farms
Yes.
and out of the labs and actually understanding that citizen science is just as valuable. And, as farmers, we see it in the field and we have anecdotal evidence and we think these things. But if it's not proven in the scientific world, then it's not true. And that's a challenge to overcome. Like, the movement is so rapid at the moment. And even, the things that are coming out now that farmers are seeing, science that doesn't understand yet. So it's getting scientists out of the lab and into the field would be helpful.
And I just want to finish up saying that is a particular frustration of mine, is that I very rarely anymore have an answer for a question because no one's bothered to fund that. You're on your own. I can give you a guess, but actually we're not learning what it is that needs to be, what experiments need to be designed. And I suppose, yes, getting out, things like this, standing in your field in the rain, is how we can try and bridge that gap.
Can I just make one really quick point? I think if we let me just pick soil as an example of an interest of mine. We have meetings like this where some scientists are invited. On the flip side, there are academic meetings in soil science where occasionally there's a farmer or two. We just need soils meetings, and where people who have an interest in soil would come along. And it doesn't really matter whether you're an agronomist, a scientist, a farmer, or citizens. If we need to sort of get out of that sort of these different groups would attend different meetings. We should just have conferences and meetings on soil for people who are interested in soil.
I should say, when I introduced Sasha, he was also the ex-chair of the British Society for Soil Science. So you've had some experience, I assume, in that role.
Yeah, and that was kind of the point. When I was president, and even now, there are annual meetings on soil science, but that are 95% attended by just academic soil scientists.
So we're failing in that sense. Okay. So now I'd like to open the floor to questions. Straight away. Lady down the front here.
I used to attend soil science conferences, and then there was a sort of, I don't know how to say this politely, but the science, I won't say it politely. No. There was the soil science conferences becoming so dominated by scientists, it felt like there was a big fuck off to farmers, and there is almost like a different language. If I attempt to read, well, first of all, I don't have access to, and I don't have an academic login, so I can't bloody read your work. Big sulk. But also, can you please write those papers in ways that actually human beings can read?
What level are we aiming at?
My level, low.
No.
O-level science.
Well, I don't know quite how to answer that, actually.
I'll have a go.
Thank you.
That's absolutely a brilliant question. So let me just focus on the positive. I obviously, that's your experience. I wouldn't disagree with it. But where we are now, there is a culture change. That isn't happening. I mean, my lab group's just recently won a new project looking at soil health that's led by farmers, and we are the partners on it, not the other way around. So I think there is a huge change in that. These meetings such as we are at today, they are more popular than ever, and even if you take social media interactions, you'll see academics interacting with farmers around these meetings. So I think that it will take time to get to where we need to be, but I don't see the environment you described as the future environment going forward. And just to mention the thing about the papers, any funding that scientists receive from any government organisations, all of the outputs from that have to be made available freely for everyone to look at them. And we provide training at most institutes now to ensure that scientists also take time to generate documents that are widely available and written at different levels for different audiences. Most funders will insist that academics dedicate time to outreach, such as attending events like this. So I'm really sorry that you had that experience. I don't doubt it for a second, but I hope that we wouldn't be sat here in 10 years saying the same thing.
Yeah, I'd echo that point because it is kind of more and more on the agenda about outreach. But it does take a concerted effort for academics to make time and to develop the skills to be able to talk to farmers. It's not something that's easy to do, to stand up on a stage and talk to all of you guys. I'm lucky in that I love beetles enough to brave it, but, and to disseminate those materials. But I am quite passionate about the value of that, of the things that I get back from you guys when I do this. But I've been trying to make materials that are accessible to farmers, and I'm always open to ideas of how I can get that information in a format that is accessible to you also. Any ideas, please throw them at me.
Thank you. And I'm going to move on to the next question now, which is right down here.
My question's to Tim. Your soils look absolutely fabulous. That's brilliant. I think this is the way we're all, the industry should be going. I just want to ask you, as a contract farmer, how do you physically pay and get that to where's your income streams coming from over those 4-year periods? Because it looks like obviously input's been significantly reduced. There's quite a cost to this process. That farm's benefited massively, but you've not actually got that return to yourself during that contract farming period. How can we all change in these periods to get to where you got to?
Yeah, I mean, from a financial perspective, I guess as a small-scale contract farmer coming into that situation, I was very naive in terms of the investment required to make that profitable as a contract farmer, because that was my first experience. But basically, the return that we're getting off that farm was based on live weight gain, so running store cattle. So we're running sort of anywhere between 150 to 200 head of store cattle, and that was kind of the return off that system. We played around with, I think that we had some stewardship payments in there. I think with the new SFI payment, like the GS4 is very restrictive, and so half the farm was set up for GS4, whereas if we could put everything into the SAM3 payment, that would probably net another 30 grand return on what we're taking. So I think, that's quite a low-hanging fruit, is setting up these complex functional swards and going for that payment as a transitional support until you get your soils to a point where you can now, I know that the next person who comes onto that farm is going to have a bumper harvest, and hopefully they remember me for it at some point. Yeah.
I know there's a question over here, but I'm looking straight into a light, so I have no idea who it is. So we've got a microphone there.
Yeah, I've got a microphone. Thank you. Oh, hello. I just want to follow up on Robin Jackson's question right at the beginning of our session this morning. We had a show of hands in the room of who were dairy farmers, who were beef farmers, and arable, I think, as well. But just picking up on the diversity of audience and taking the message of what we're discussing here today out into the world, and also mindful of, the temperature of society at the moment when it comes to farming and biodiversity. Can we have a show of hands in the room today of who is not actually involved in any form of formal agriculture? Like, for example, if you work in ecology, can I see your hands up? Oh, wow. Is that it? Okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so is there anybody who doesn't actively work in farming here? Like, you're not a farm advisor, you don't work in the industry. So that's kind of interesting that there are people... Aquaculture, so like rivers, that's kind of ecology? Seaweed. Cool, okay, that's kind of interesting. Because it's kind of interesting as well, just people who aren't actually actively working in agriculture to take an interest in these topics and to talk to your friends and your family about these things that are going on and to change our perception of farming as well and to take that message out into the wider community. So it's not really a question, it's just more of an interest.
Yeah, and I think that's a statement that we would all subscribe to, and I know, well, certainly the three of us, we're here trying to do that. And that dialogue is really, I think, the most important thing that is changing. I think Sasha's right, that's changing now. We've got a question down the front.
Yeah, following on really from that statement, this is a question for Martin, who I'm in awe of the organisation you've set up and the amount of traction you've achieved over the 6 years. It's really interesting hearing Sasha and Kelly talking about a culture change within the scientific community. How confident are you, Martin, and could you paint a sort of vision of what our industry might look like in 10 years' time in achieving what you've achieved around your village? Fundamentally, you've turned farming and its reputation around your Cambridgeshire village on its head. How confident are you that the vision of our industry in 10 years' time is going to look radically different from what it has in the past 10 years?
I'm very hopeful it will. The reality is I see all the major supply chains want to buy products from regenerative systems. Society wants to support a better farmed landscape. All of the indicators are going down that road. I talk to thousands of farmers across the UK and Europe and worldwide in what I do. Is there's a lot of willingness at the grassroots level to understand and do things. And there's a lot of noise of negativity above saying, what about food production, food security, what about payments? Reality on the ground, farmers are seeing the impacts of climate, are seeing the impacts of high energy costs and input price, and they are looking for solutions. And I think collectively, we can do this together. We need to support each other, we need to work together, and we need to celebrate. It goes back to the point, we need to celebrate what we do as farmers to the public and to policymakers and to supply chains, but we need the value to be recognised for what we produce and put the value back on the farm, not in some brand, some supply chain that adds value down the chain. But I am, put it this way, there's no other solution. Because if we don't, we're pretty buggered as farmers because our landscape's depleting, our soil's depleting, the water quality. If we don't, where will our business be in 10 years' time? But it's for each and every single farm business to find their own path to get to that goal of a really healthy ecosystemally-based farm, producing amazing food, but also recognising all the other products we're going to produce at a fair price. And I think that's the direction we're going to go.
So, how much time have we got left? Are we in lunchtime already? Yeah. We are. Well, in that case, I've got 2 questions I want to take. There's a gentleman here who's already got a microphone, and then a gentleman at the back, and I'm afraid they will have to be the last formal questions, but I know everyone will be here to talk for the rest of the day. So let's hear your question now, please.
Hi, Phil Pearce, local mixed farm. Just a quick question to Martin and Tim. I was wondering, with everything you've done on your farms, what your soil indexes were and what are they now, or have they improved or have they changed much?
So when I came into this situation at Barton, the indices were quite low. One thing that I'm kicking myself for not doing is doing more baselining, and I'm going to have to sneak back in under the cover of darkness and take some more soil samples so that I can show that they have lifted. And my hypothesis is that they have definitely lifted, because you wouldn't have just the look and the feel and the health of the farm. And understanding what I'm learning through Nicole Masters is that, most soil tests, like I was talking to her the other night about it, and she's like, to be honest, don't even worry about your soil test, because it's tissue test, sap analysis, yeah, that's really critical. You can get a window into your indices, that's fine, but actually until you change up the management, that's when the system starts changing. And I think, a lot of farmers get this piece of paper and they're completely confused, and so they'll just go and put on some fertiliser because their fertiliser salesman's told them to. Whereas, part of that is empowering farmers to actually understand what that soil assessment means is quite important, and actually understanding what functional soils. It's kind of like one piece in the puzzle. You've got your physical elements, you've got your mineral elements, but I think you've also got this biological element, and for me, that's been the critical piece in the puzzle to get those nutrient cycling going. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
I wish we'd have took more samples and put them in a jar and dried them out and put them on a shelf somewhere, because we didn't see the difference. But I've had people visit the farm, like the agronomist who takes his wellies off when he turns up to put his leather boots on, and I'm like, we're going for a walk. He says, but it won't stick to my boots here. Your neighbours, you call it the mess, we've just come in. We don't see it because we see it, we normalise it. But we're seeing all indices going up into better places, soil organic content's going up. We've zoned the field, so we know where we need to really target to improve it. It is only going one way. Costs are going down, filtration of water, resilience in crops. It was only when you stop and take notice and benchmark it to what, particularly over the hedge, where my neighbours are a very conventional system, the differences that are showing up. So it is going one way, and the bank balance is improving, which is the most important thing for me.
Thank you. I've been told that under absolutely no circumstances can I take this last question. But I would say, as a scientist, you can never take too many samples. So if you're going to do something, take a sample before you change it. If nothing else, for your own peace of mind, and you can see the change that you're making. No, you can't say anything. Otherwise, Mel will have a... No,
but also, whatever
it.
you do something not the same. Then you'll see the difference.
So I'm sorry to have kept you from your lunch, but before you go, I would just ask you to thank Sasha, Kelly, Martin and Tim. Thank you.
Yes, a bit of silence would be wonderful. Anyway, great. Thank you all very much for making it back after this morning for what will be, I hope, will be a fascinating afternoon. For our third session, Professor Will Blake from the University of Plymouth is our chair. We have an abundance of people who enjoy soil. And this is unfortunate, really, because most of us could talk for soil for hours, but we wanted to diversify the range of subjects that we're talking about. So Will Blake, who's actually Professor of Catchment Science, is actually we're doing terrific work on soil carbon. It's for the purposes of this session, an expert chair, a geographer, and a consumer. And I'm really, really pleased to have Will here. But then I'll hand over to him for the third session. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Harry. Yeah, I think we had a really nice link into this session, which is thinking differently, routes to market. A really nice link was left with us at the end of the previous session, where I think Peter brought up the issue of a fair price. And I think that's something we really need to get to grips with today. And I've noticed, certainly in my work, thinking about the challenges, and a lot of the challenges we've heard about today that the agri-sector faces, quite often in my world, the first thing that comes up is environmental sustainability. But when I speak to farmers and we talk about the context of the work and the challenges we're trying to solve together, it's financial sustainability has to be the principal concern and business resilience. And so trying to find that balance between the environmental sustainability and the financial sustainability is a really important issue for us to get to grips with. And I think there's a piece of work, thinking about myself as a consumer, as Harry introduced me just now, there's a piece of work that needs to be done to really raise awareness in, I guess, the consumer world, in the policy world, about that, the importance of that balance, and certainly from an agri-sector point of view, the fact that financial sustainability has to be first and foremost, because without that, the businesses can't survive and thrive, and they can't deliver the environmental sustainability that we all want through our different lenses. So I guess there's been some recent debate, and there's been sort of the awareness has been raised through the work of Guy Watson recently. He was, as I'm sure you're aware, up at Parliament campaigning for fair price for farmers, with particularly thinking through the supermarket lens. But of course, there's more than one way to do that, and that's something that we're going to hear about today from our speakers, different ways of engaging with consumers, particularly thinking about short and more transparent supply chains. So I guess the questions we're really trying to get to grips with here are there less costly routes to get produce to market? And where are the opportunities to diversify there, whilst also satisfying other demands like the environmental sustainability? So trying to marry those two things together, I think, is something we're going to hear about through different lenses from our speakers. So I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our speakers today. They've all got different perspectives, different experiences of alternative routes to market. And really, they're all experts collectively in the chain on the other side of the farm gate, and particularly that relationship between food and farming. So we're sort of moving away from the sort of the environmental into this area, but of course the two remain intertwined, as I think we're going to find out from our speakers. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what they've got to say, thinking about how they've transformed their businesses and how that might reflect on things and ambitions in the room as well. So we've got a decent amount of time to hear from each speaker. We'll then sit at the table and have a bit of discussion amongst the group, and then we'll open up to the floor for questions. So we've got until 3 o'clock, don't we? So we've got plenty of time to tackle this issue. So we'll hear from each speaker in turn. First up, we'll have Abby Allen from Piper's Farm, followed by Andy Gray from Farm Wilder, and then Bertie Matthews from Matthews Cotswold Flour. So over to you, Abby, to take the stage.
Short person in the room. I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone for coming out, because you guys are all super busy people, and to come and share this day together and to talk about something so important is a huge thing. And I also just want to say what an amazing group of people, the knowledge in this room, the kind of inspiration, the passion and the enthusiasm for moving farming in an upwards trajectory is brilliant. So it's a big old crowd to talk to. So I'm going to do my best to try and explain a little bit about what we do. So I haven't prepared lots of slides. I'm not an academic. I'm very much a practical person. But the one slide I have prepared is hopefully quite a powerful piece that signifies our business. So for those that maybe don't know about Piper's Farm, it was founded about 30 years ago by Peter and Henry Gregg, who are in the room, who I know many of you know. And they were very brave and very kind of early in adopting this idea of going, we do not want to see farming continue on the trajectory it's going. We do not want to see the increased sort of intensification, the loss of small-scale family farms, the homogenization of supply chains. And so they decided the only way they could stop that happening was to take back control and to build a market themselves. So they started with a shop in Exeter, and they did a mail order business. They would drive to London, they would go to the food lovers fairs and Borough Market, and they would try and build direct relationships with their customers. About 10 years ago, I joined the business, and really my remit of all sorts of things. In a small business, you tend to do all the jobs from unblocking the drains to helping in the butchery to trying to set up social media. So one of the things that my role really was around was looking at our routes to market, looking at how we grow, how do we get this product out to more people, and how do we get our customers and potential customers to really understand, how that product has been produced, which is incredibly challenging, as I'm sure you guys are aware, as kind of the customer base has become more and more detached from farming. So I inherited the shop. I inherited a small e-commerce website. We would have, a £75 order a day, and I would cheer and go, oh my God, someone's bought on the website, how exciting. And we looked at things like supplying restaurants. Michael Keynes is in the room. He was one of the very early supportive people that helped us in our journey of working with chefs. We looked at growing more shops. We went from 1 to 2, which we thought was a phenomenal growth in quite a short period of time. And we tried lots of different routes to market to find something that we felt fit our kind of skills within the business and was able to support these incredible small-scale farmers. I guess I've got lots of T-shirts from all of those different routes to market, and hopefully I can share some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, some of the benefits of these different routes, and some of the things that I wish somebody had told me when we explored these markets. So I'm really keen to hear from you guys and try and answer any questions that you might have. Today, Piper's Farm has an e-commerce website solely. We have no other route to market, and we supply around 80,000 boxes a year. And at Christmas, we fed about 60,000 people, which is a pretty stressful time to think, don't cock it up. The most important day of the year as well. So, and with that, we're only able to do that because we have an amazing supply chain behind us. So we work with 50 small-scale, mostly family-run farms, all producing meat in harmony with nature. A huge part of our business model is all about the people. So we always knew that we never wanted to scale the farm, become bigger and bigger. As our business grew, it gave us the opportunity to bring on a new farmer. So where we felt, okay, we need more bullocks coming through the pipeline, let's add another farmer on, let's add and add and add. And that is very much my role today, is trying to keep up with our sales trajectory and make sure that the supply chain is coming through. So at every part of what we want to do, it's all about putting people absolutely at the heart of our business and basically supporting them to be able to produce food in harmony with nature and know whatever happens, they have that absolute guaranteed market. So they know that that food that they're producing on that farm is going to go somewhere and somebody's going to value it and appreciate it. They become sort of part of the conversation of being a price maker instead of a price taker. The second sort of thing I want to talk to you guys about is, there are so many different routes to market, and I am hugely sort of passionate about not saying everybody in this room needs to create an online business like Piper's Farm. Everybody in this room should supply restaurants and wholesale. You need to find the thing that gives you a bit of joy, that you think, actually, not only am I being paid fairly for this, but I really enjoy this process, and have a think about the whole kind of farm enterprise. So many of our farmers I speak to, they want to farm. They don't want to be in a room packing boxes. They don't want to be in an office filling out paperwork or dealing with customers or tracking down that DPD parcel that has been thrown over somebody's hedge and booted around the corner. They want to be outside in nature. And so really thinking about, what drives me and what brings me joy is a huge part of thinking differently about those supply chains and finding the right market for you. And then the last thing to say is, we have been on a huge journey of engaging customers and really trying to explain the absolute magic and the unbelievable hard work that goes into getting food to people's tables. And I feel like, you know, this is the bit that is maybe slightly pessimistic, but also slightly hopeful. I think looking for retailers to quickly change the way that they go about supplying food to customers is, as we all know, is not going to happen. Asking government to solve the questions for us is incredibly challenging. So I'm a huge advocate of the grassroots movement. Get on and do it yourself. You know, work hard and find those routes to market and find those places that you can really gain traction rather than waiting for other people to sort of make that decision for you. So hopefully that explains a little bit about Piper Smart. But I'm really keen to kind of just answer any questions that you guys have about selling direct or any other questions you may have. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Andy Gray. I've been introduced as Farm Wilder, but hopefully I've got a slide coming up in a minute. I only have one. There we are. So that's the sort of things that I do. So a little bit of history. I'm sort of epigenetically a marketeer in as much as my family have sold cider for about 300 years. And so that gave me the opportunity at a very early age to get the sort of endorphin rush of selling things, because there's nothing like it really. And it also sort of gives you that history of experience of that ability to tack and take advantage of changes of context and changes of opportunity and that sort of thing. To give you an example, in the Napoleonic War, there was a lot of quite rich Frenchmen locked up in Dartmoor prison, and they couldn't get any wine, but they could get money. So off the back of the fact that we took them 100 gallons of cider a week, we managed to buy another farm. So it's a... So the world is full of opportunities, and it is just that capacity to see them and take advantage of them. The skill set of marketing, I think, is very similar to farming in as much as it's context-driven, you're adaptive, it's about the capacity to observe and spot new opportunities and that sort of thing. So I think everybody in this room has that the predisposition to being able to do it. It's just whether or not you can bear the sight of the public and talking to them and all that sort of thing, and sorting out all the problems of Mrs. Miggins, who wants 12 drumsticks instead of 13, and she got 13, all that sort of thing. So I grew up producing cider and selling it, and because we had a passing trade of cider customers, when I was 11, I bought 4 tons of main crop spuds off my uncle up in Hampshire in 1976. And hooray, we had a drought, and everybody else's main crops failed. So I quadrupled the price of those spuds and made 500 quid when I was 11. So that sort of encourages you. Those early opportunities and wins do make you think, oh, there's something in this. And I'd sell them anything. I'm not proud. Manure. I used to kill chickens, pluck them and sell them. My father cut down all the elm trees and Dutch elm disease and sold them for pittance. I cut down one hollow one and turned them into flower pots and sold them for more than he did from selling 20 or 30 bunches of firewood. So it's where's the gap? The conversation around that I want to put to you is there's no point in me telling you how to, this is the way to do it, because as Abby says, we're all different. We have different sets of opportunities. If you live on a track down to the beach, you can probably sell ice creams. But if you live in the middle of Devon, it's less and away from the public. It's much less of much less opportunity. So in my early days, I needed to earn money to go to college. So I worked for MC Kelly Limited. I worked on the line, killing and plucking and gutting chickens and turkeys. I hated it, but it made money, and I ended up coming back to it in later life, working there, becoming a director, running it and owning the company. And so we employ about 70 people. We supply hotels and restaurants across Devon and Cornwall, about 450, I guess. The interesting thing with the comparison between all these different things I do is everyone is a slightly different proposition, and everyone is supplying a different sort of need. So the first thing but everybody forgets to do is actually ask the customer what they want. We all assume that we know what they want, but actually that's not necessarily what they want. And then you have to intellectualize whether they told you the truth and whether or not they actually know what they want anyway, and add in all those extra bits on top of it. So MC Kelly sells meat. Originally it was chickens and turkeys. Started in 1955. We're still here now, but that's because we evolved into doing things people want and dropping the things that they suddenly decided they didn't want. I think that what we sell is the fact the meat arrives more than anything else. If you've got 80 people coming for a wedding and the meat that you want for that wedding hasn't turned up, then not buying it from a cheaper supplier who didn't deliver it, that was a terrible mistake. So the fact it arrives is really important. The next most important thing is that when you send it out of the kitchen, it doesn't come back into the kitchen with a complaint, because you might have bought it for 50 pence a steak less, but that tough steak, because it was slightly cheaper, is again a mistake. You've just lost. We bought the steak for £4.50. You sold it for £25. You say you've just lost the value of an awful lot of 50p's on top of that. So sometimes cheapest isn't best, and then. In that situation, people actually just wanted to taste good. So these are the sort of the main propositions in the MC Kelly business, which are critical to what we're trying to achieve there. Moving on to other things on there, we at the beginning of COVID, effectively we lost all our customers in a week. So we went. I won't say the word, but. In a week, we started meat boxes, which is what Abby's also doing. They're really good at it. We're not. But at the beginning of COVID, it was really easy because everybody went, Christ, where's our food coming from? So we sold an awful lot of meat boxes at the very beginning, and then it became quite a crowded market. But meat boxes, online marketing is an option, but it isn't easy, and I would not necessarily recommend it. And the one thing you do have to build in is the margin for DPD losing about 5% of your boxes, and or else being late and therefore having to return them and have them returned and that sort of thing. I like the sustainable agriculture side of things, as you might have guessed. So we then opened a label, or we worked with a CIC called Farm Wilder, which is just a small part of what we do. Again, we're not awfully good at it, but we do sell a reasonable amount of these boxes. I'm a great believer in getting people out of their silos and mixing, getting people talking more and more. And the funny thing is that I have 2 vegans and a vegetarian as my brand ambassadors, and that's Chris Packer, Malice Roberts, and Kate Humble, and then a few other minor sort of celebrity presenters who they're all on our website saying, eat this meat, it's good for nature. And we work with farmers across mainly Dartmoor and Exmoor, where we pay them more, and because of the work they do towards regenerative agriculture, plus a bit of extra nature as well. The CIC checks that they're behaving themselves and doing what they should be doing and encourages them along the journey. And then we use that story. So very often marketing is about, we're storytellers. This is how you sell stuff, is by a lot of the time. Sometimes you just provide what people need. Sometimes you're telling a story, hopefully a story that the world wants to buy into. It's amazing how they still won't buy it if it's 10 pence more expensive. But the reality is it still gives you a competitive edge, because even if it's the same price, they'll just go, I'll have that one rather than that one. The world does want to buy into this, but the cynical side of me, which Abby proves is wrong, so I shouldn't be so cynical, but a lot of people aren't willing to pay that extra, and a lot of people can't afford to pay that extra either. And then, because we hate waste, we started a dog food company, and we mince anything which we can't sell, which I call the economically less relevant bits, so lamb breast and things like that, and we turn it into dog food. That's great. People don't care what they pay for their dogs. Children, well, no way, but dogs. So we make 10 times the margin on the dog food as we do so we employ 7 people, turn over 1/7 of the amount, and we make just as much money out of the dog food as we do the human food. So there's a lesson for you. Don't produce commodities, produce sort of niche stuff which is just different from everybody else. And so that's been a fantastic thing. So first of all, we started the Farmer's Dog, which is a pure meat, and then we did Basil's, where we took over a failing company and turned it around and made a lovely margin on that. Basil's has got more vegetables in it, which just makes you more money. And apparently some dogs like vegetables. But so that's that. And then my sort of final enterprise, which is just starting up, is Exeter Volcanic Quarry. On my 150-acre postage stamp, I have a very exciting stone, which Andy Neal's bored about hearing about, and that's very useful for. It's a heritage stone. A lot of our churches and big houses and small houses are built from this stone, and it's just, you look around, there's an opportunity. It's great. You dig it out of the ground. It doesn't go off in a week. Sorry, Michael, I don't have to deal with diva chefs, and it's just a very low stress business. So a guy turns up, sprays it with a spray can, saying that's the stone I want, and chuck it on a lorry, weigh it. They send me money. It's very simple, really. What's that? Yeah, so the field next door to it is called Mount Hindrance, and you can understand why, because it's a pig to plough. So is that long enough? Okay, right. I should look at my speech and just see what I should have said. The world is full of opportunities. That's the one thing I will say. I'll tell you one last story. Is I went to the comprehensive school in Crediton. Outside was a public lavatory. The council shut it, and I watched them getting stick over it for about 4 or 5 years. And I thought, I'll buy that. So I bought it and turned it into a burger bar. And it's just an opportunity. Everybody else drove past it every single day. I bought it for not a lot, and it's not just a nice little business, really. So there's a multitude of ways to get to market, but it's entirely down to your context, your personal history, what you enjoy doing, what you hate doing, and just make it up yourselves, really. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to be nowhere near as funny as the previous act. I'll try my best. So my name's Bertie Matthews, and I'm from a flour milling family in the Cotswolds. And what I hope to do today in the next 10 minutes is talk a little bit about the mill and what it does, a little bit about our story, and essentially the route to market for farmers is there's many options, but with us there's obviously many options as well. Just from a quick show of hands, who has been brave enough to farm wheat in the last 12 months? Okay, a few of you, well done. Hopefully there's a few more from the last 10 years. It's a great thing to do, and I'm going to explain why. I'll talk a little bit about ourselves. So we're a flour milling company. There's really 18 flour milling companies in the UK. 6 million tonnes worth of grain produced and milled every year. 5 million tonnes of flour. That's 2 million acres. 12 million, well, a lot of millions there. 12 million loaves of bread, 2 million slices of pizza every single day. So it's a huge industry, 18 companies, and we are probably the smallest. Okay, so below us are the windmills and the water mills, but we distribute all over to the UK. So this is us. Family business, 8 generations, been going about 200 years. First 100 years we did farming, obviously couldn't make enough money, so converted to flour milling in 1912. Talk a little bit about our history. So these are generations: Marmaduke, Frederick, Bertie. That's where we are. I'm the 5th of 8 children. Okay, I don't know what that says, but obviously all the ones before me didn't want to do it. So the first one's called Frederick. That's why we've changed it now. Basically, I'll just talk a little bit about a history. I'm not necessarily from a farming background. I'm not necessarily from a milling background. I worked in London. I worked in New York. Because I was the 5th, I didn't expect to be in this position. In 2017, I came back to help my father out for a couple of months before another job. And at that time, we entered into something called a CVA. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's the bit before administration and the bit you don't want to be in. So no idea what a CVA was. I sat in a meeting with my father and my grandfather, and Barclays Bank encouragingly told us that we had a 10% chance of survival. So great career choice by me. Really, really tough time. And actually, when we talk about farming or we talk about producing food or whatever it may be, for us as producers, as flour millers, it's the same thing. It's a very low margin business. It's 1-2% on average net profit. You're dealing with, a commodity that you're trying to make as cheap as possible and turn it into white flour. That was the game, and we were failing at it because we were the smallest. It took 3 years to get out of that situation, and it was super difficult. It was the hardest 3 years of my life. And we did get out because just like you farmers, and you're looking for a route to market, diversification, whether you've got different types of crops or a farm shop or selling online, we had to do the same thing. So what we did as a flour mill, the white flour stuff wasn't working for us. We couldn't make any money from it. So rather than buying from a merchant, another middleman, I'm a middleman by the way, but another middleman, we decided to work direct with the farmers. So lots of different farmers growing lots of different types of grain and turning them into what is now today the widest range of baking flour anywhere in the UK. We knew we couldn't just sell to the big guys because we couldn't compete on price. So we did plant bakeries, wholesalers, but also small artisan bakeries and selling online and to retail. But in the first 3 years, the retailers didn't really want to speak to me. Rightfully so, I didn't really know what I was talking about. So, look, life is about hard work and passion and really loving what you do and doing it for a reason. And I felt an immense sense of responsibility, probably too much responsibility at times. So what then happened is 2020 happened and COVID happened, and two things occurred, and we've alluded to it before. One is we were doing 100 and 150 orders online per month, and then the next month we did 250,000. We also lost 30% of our trade, but it was a great opportunity for us. The other thing that happened is those people that didn't really want to be my friends were suddenly my best friends, the guys from Tesco and Waitrose and Co-op, because they were desperate for flour. So great opportunity for us, and we managed to extract ourselves from that 10% survival scenario. So this is where we sort of are today, and we're looking ahead now. So I'm 32. I'm probably still going to be doing this in 30, 40 years, and we need to look at what it is we want to do. Okay, I'm very lucky that there is a guy called Ian Wilkinson from FarmEd who lives, well, he is about 400 meters away, and I met him in 2018, and I didn't know anything about regenerative agriculture, agroforestry. I didn't know what that was. So inspired by what he was doing, I was like, well, this is it. This is what we've got to do. Conventional flour milling is great, nothing wrong with that, but this is way more interesting. So we've put it at the center of our strategy. And before you get carried away and think that we're going to be really rich, we're not. And I'm going to explain why in a little bit more. So simple mission, diverse market, lots of routes to market, online, retail, artisan bakeries, really broad product range, because that supports the diversity on the farm, spelts, rye, purchase ackee, durums, all of those kind of things. And selling it wide. And over the next 7 years, doing that and sourcing it from regenerative agriculture, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. So this Regeneration 2030, this is our plan. So we can source grain or wheat from 10,000 acres, of the 2 million. So big impact. But for us, that's our goal, okay? And that's what we want to do. These essentially are the reasons behind doing it. Okay, because it's going to make a difference. And if I'm going to be doing this in 30 years, maybe my daughter will be doing it in 30 years, and I want her to be buying from the same farms with really good soil fertility rather than degrading soil fertility. So really, it's a sustainability strategy. We talked about it before. The most important part of sustainability is a sustainable financial business, and that's our main objective. I can go into this in the questions, but essentially for us, what this means is the farms are incorporating those 5 practices and more. They also are agreeing to a set of standards, a set of audits, and some scientific measurements. And by the way, if anyone can help us out with that, I'd love to talk to them, because trying to get farmers all to do the same scientific measurements is really difficult when you're 32 and they don't want to listen to you. So, because it's like, what do you know? Well, it's true. So our objective is obviously increase soil fertility, increase biodiversity, increase water retention, and carbon sequestration. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about numbers here, and I took this about 2 months ago. Feel free to read it, take a picture. I really don't care. That's why I put it up here. Here are three graphs, and I've taken this from the average conventional yield from 150 farms we deal with this year. I've taken this from the average organic yield from an organic farm that we've taken this year, and the average price. and I've taken that from the average regenerative farm. So this is a farm that's incorporating these 5 practices. They're taking their own measurements. They've been doing it for at least 7 to 8 years. So they're a relatively strict model. Now, that says 7 to 7.5 tonne per hectare. I've seen 8.5. And if we go down to the average price that they're getting and then convert it to per hectare, so how much are they making per hectare? You can see that before you even factor in costs, just from our small data set, the regenerative farms are coming out on top. Not too far away from conventional, because you might get more than that on conventional. But they're not spending money on lots of nitrogen, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. And the reason they're getting those yields, and I'll be honest, is because they've been doing it for a long period of time. So the challenge is going to be, how do we get the new farms who want to do this? And that was going to be my question before. So, and this is give you a bit of an example of what the lowest possible flour cost would be. So if you know any bakers, make sure they don't get screwed over by price. Because a key part, if the objective is, let's make regenerative agriculture just agriculture, then each part of the supply chain can't go, oh, I'm going to make loads of money here. Like, that's not going to work. So we've got to be really fair. And if I'm completely honest with you, the conversations we're having, somebody's going to be squeezed by margin, and it's going to be us, because it's farmer, miller, retailer, or producer, or consumer. And just to give you an example of flour on the shelf, this is branded flour. If you look to the far right, the retailer is going to take at least 40%. If not more. I've seen a lot more than that. Then you've got distribution, then you've got marketing. And by the way, when you deal with the retailers, you have to commit to their marketing. It's another way for them to make money. Would you like to feature in our magazine that no one's read? Oh, okay, fine. So the producer actually isn't getting that much on this particular model. Again, those are some of the key elements that I think are going to be the foundation for the future of this model. So our initial objective is to basically, okay, we can mill this much flour. Let's try and get all of it from regenerative agriculture in the next, between now and 2030. That's the mission. And source 100% of our specialist flours from that model. So we're having these conversations now. We do have a flour within Tesco that comes from a regenerative model. And we're looking at expanding that over the next 6 months, also with Waitrose and Cobb. But also the big change is going to come from the large plant bakeries. Of that 5 million tonne I spoke about, 85% of that flour goes into large industrial bakeries. 10% goes into bakeries in retail, which only leaves 5% for the small baker or the independent. It's a very small fraction. So it's the big businesses that we need to try and convince, and they are starting to listen, and they are looking to come out onto the farms. So that's really important. I'm going to finish by just saying that in May I'm going to get married. So that's quite exciting. Yeah. There's a point to this. There's a point. Who cares? So I met my partner 6 years ago. Okay, so we're past the honeymoon period, I assure you. Okay? And at the beginning, it was super exciting. You know, we knew it was going to be great. We're really passionate. Everything's going to be amazing. That's a bit like regenerative agriculture now. Okay? We're all excited. We know it's going to be good. We're not quite sure how it's going to work. But maybe just like a relationship, I think, this is a Valentine's Day sort of pun, just like a relationship, actually, it's the consistent application of commitment and love that's going to yield the greatest results and value in the long term, okay? Someone's happy in the marriage. So hopefully regenerative agriculture and us all working together will essentially, will be that. It will just be farming, and that's the plan. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So 3 really inspirational stories there, and lots to think about. If we start off with a bit of a conversation at the table, then we'll open up to the floor. I mean, I'm curious about, all 3 of you have sort of environmental credentials at the heart of your operations. Do sort of conditions of are there conditions of membership if somebody wanted to join as a supplier, and how do you sort of facilitate that transition into your chains if there's some kind of a financial hurdle or operational hurdles? What's the sort of the support structures within the systems?
I think initially there's the people who are quite far ahead on this model And like I said, then it's are you implementing these practices? Can you prove it? Can a third party prove it or audit it? Do you have measurements to prove what's happening on the farm? Can you allow the visits to happen? So those are the guys or guys and girls who are quite mature on this road. And then I think the harder part is going to be the new farmers looking to incorporate a regenerative model, because there is going to be a challenge in a yield penalty initially, which is going to affect their margins and their financial sustainability. So what we've committed to over the next, at least for the next 6 years, is applying a premium plus. So if the base price is whatever it is, £180 per tonne, you get a milling premium, which you would get anyway, of £60 per tonne, but then we're applying a regenerative milling premium plus, as it were, which is up to another £50 per tonne. So the idea is that when you look at that graph of yield versus price, it will smooth out that transition. So in the short term, hopefully that should help. So that's the plan.
Is it? I don't know. Ooh, yes. We are on. Our business is all about people, and so mindset is incredibly important. So instead of us putting in a big sort of hefty rule book, it is about finding people that are as committed to nature-friendly farming as we are and have that energy and enthusiasm to see those things through, which means that you tend to get more out of them. They're out there testing their soil, they're out there with their Merlin app. And I think there's a lot of things within regenerative agriculture that it's really hard to build into some sort of certification scheme or model. Very much it's about finding the right system, the right mindset, and making sure that that fits in with our supply chain. In terms of finances, we're on a journey with people. What we don't want to do is make this so inaccessible that people think, I've got to change the whole farm in order to supply you. That's one of the magical things about Piper's Farm is, you can try, let's say you have an example is one of our farmers grows fodder beet. He started by running just a few pigs on the fodder as a way of reducing his input. So can the pigs, fertilise the soil? Can they help with reducing the ploughing? And then as he sort of felt more comfortable, realised that actually there's there's some money I can make out of these pigs. He can expand that. He now rears lambs for us. He's done turkeys for us before. So that's one of the exciting things about the Piper's Farm model is you're not insisting the farmer has to change absolutely everything because A, we know things take a long time to change, and B, there is a hell of a lot of risk. And so the idea of this is that you can kind of go gradually and slowly and really make sure that A, we're all aligned with our mindset and beliefs, and also that it works for your farming system.
So on our Farm Wilder brand, we have a CIC which basically looks after that supply chain and makes and encourages people along the journey. From the MC Kelly perspective, we just want to sell good tasting meat, and the reality is most of the time we're looking at heritage indigenous breeds and just trying to buy good stuff, which tends to lean more in that direction anyway. And it's very much the emphasis on grass fed. I don't want to sell a barley fed bull beef, and I don't particularly want to sell a continental bullock over most of the time. So it's there's degrees of journey, and I think it's very much important, but we don't negatively market, and I'm sure none of us here do negatively market and say they're rubbish, we're good. We just say we believe in what we're doing and we're really proud of what we do, and I think that's a really key message when it comes to marketing at any time.
Thank you. Maybe just to pick up on that point, from the consumer perspective, do you get a sense of where the consumer opinion fits in? And you mentioned quality earlier, Andy, that quality seems to be the fundamental factor for your consumers. But what about the sort of the environmental credential? And how can the consumers access that sort of at the supermarket shelf, as it were?
Well, we hate supermarkets, so the Antichrist as far as we're concerned. But
of course, you're not. Yeah, you're independent. But how can they access it at the shelf, be it the internet or
But the consumer. I mean, Abby is the real queen when it comes to this sort of thing, from the point of view of selling that, but delivering the story with the meat and getting that consumer buy-in. And we know it's fair, and it's something which we all can take advantage of.
It's really simple. If it doesn't taste good, they won't buy it again. So starting out with every single part of our system, it's all about
they're absolute eating quality. So it's why we work with native breeds. It's why we believe pasture-fed beef is better than grain-fed beef. We think it tastes better. It's why we hang everything. It's why we have a whole carcass butchery, and we continue to train butchers and invest money in doing that. It's why that we, tweak everything from shall we hang pigs for 2 weeks to 3 weeks, and what does that happen to the flavour profile? We're constantly testing and tweaking everything within our supply chain and within how we go to produce that food, because we want to make it absolutely incredible for the consumer. So they go, oh my God, this is so much better than the supermarket, and I'm willing to stick with you, I'm willing to support your farmers, and I passionately believe in what you guys are doing, because the proof is in the eating.
And I think we've missed the really boring stuff, and that is it has to be safe. It has to be legislatively, right in all ways. It's got to have the right labelling. It has to have a health mark. It has to be processed within the cold chain, and this whole set of prerequisites before you actually get to the point of telling your story or anything else. So don't think it's just well, hey, this is great, because it's a lot more than that.
You've said it all. Yeah.
Okay, we've got some time. Shall we open up to the audience? Yeah, and straight away there's a hand up here. Do we have some microphones? The gentleman just there.
Thank you. I'd be interested to know the radius of the farms that supply each of your businesses, because it appears to me that there are hotspots generated by the marketing receptacle, let's call it, and if you're within the radius of their arc, fine. Bertie, you said you were buying from 10,000 acres. That, I think you're based at Wantage. That doesn't get you down here. So what's the radius of your of your supply chains, and what do we do about the bits in between, especially in the capital-heavy processing industries like milling?
So can I just jump on that? So it's really interesting. We started very southwest heavy. We have our farm, 50 acres, and Peter and Henry went out to the neighbours. It's easy. They're on the doorstep. You can talk to them. It makes everything smooth. As the business has kind of grown, there is a bit of a misconception that Piper's Farm is only in the southwest or only in Devon. We actually have farms all around the country. So we have farms in Suffolk. We have farms, in all the different kind of nooks and crannies and corners of the country. But actually, for us, what is the most integral part of the supply chain is having a small-scale abattoir on the doorstep. So instead of thinking about travelling, live animals to, 2 hours or bringing them down to Devon for them to be killed, they have to travel locally, and then that carcass can then travel the distance of the country. So in terms of our model, we very much see it as it should be able to reach anywhere and everywhere in the country, as long as there's that small-scale abattoir. And like Andy, I've been part of the abattoir sector group. Peter's been very actively involved. It's so vital that we support that infrastructure. And I guess that's the thing that we haven't really kind of covered in this about supply chains, is all of those other ancillary businesses that are really, really integral to making this happen.
Rephrase the question. What radius to the control point, the processing point then?
So again, it doesn't really matter. So from the abattoir to our processing.
From the farm to the abattoir.
Oh, from the farm to the abattoir. Again, depends on species and lots of other factors, but we would say an hour travel is, chicken, poultry, it would be on farm or half an hour, for example. And again, it depends on how many birds you're taking. There's lots of factors. It's not kind of a one rule fits all. But yeah, having that ancillary business, having that small scale abattoir on the doorstep is integral to us scaling our business.
And the answer for us is probably about 200 miles. The Wantage is the ex-Wessex mill, not us. We're very close. We have picked up grain from Cornwall, past Birmingham, all the way, as far as Essex as well. It depends what it is. Also on a small scale. So if you've got a farm and you're growing wheat and you're thinking, I want to try something that's high value, like a spelt or like a durum or something like that, and you've got a 10-acre field, we can put it in tote bags and collect, pick it up when we've dropped off our flour down to the bottom of Cornwall. So relatively large radius because we're in the middle of the country, about 200 miles, and even more so if the farming model suits what we're looking for.
I can just tell one story about my best version of it, which is I managed to walk my beef cattle from my Silvo pasture across the car park into my lairage using my no-fence collars for my bed.
Okay, there's one just down here. Then we've got.
Hi. I think it's fantastic that there are so many different ways of getting regenerative farmed produce to market. Do you think there will be a time when regeneratively farmed produce is available on the supermarket shelf to the people who are living on benefits and low incomes? And actually the majority of the population, not the people who can afford meat boxes and artisan flour?
Great question. And if you go to Tesco today, I think our bag of all-purpose flour is about £2. So in comparison to 90p, when's that going to happen? And I think that will naturally happen as the more and more farms are growing regen ag, and if the price point can be right. But I think we also have to remember that there are loss leaders in the supermarkets where the farmer and the supermarket isn't making any money, but it's achieving that other pivotal objective, which is affordable food for the masses.
I am deeply involved with food poverty generally anyway. I do find it a fascinating subject and something which we need to all be aware of. My view on regen farming is actually we're taking costs out of a system and if this is the model for the future, it doesn't necessarily have to be any more expensive. I think the biggest challenge with food poverty is actually people's capacity to engage with their food, work out how to use the cheaper cuts, and it's much more societally systemic, really. And the other thing is we spend too much money on paying rent on our houses and not enough on buying our food in the first place anyway. So food poverty is much more complex than just the regenerative angle on it.
In a similar sort of vein, really, the three fantastic businesses, family-run businesses, if you look 65, 70 million people in the country, realistically, what percentage of their food requirements can come from family-run businesses like this? And how do we then deal with the commodity sector and what they've got to offer to what will always be, I guess, the big majority?
I think that there's a natural churn in the way businesses work and operate, and new opportunities open up, and the small business one day becomes the big business. So I think it's just important that we have startups and small businesses like ours to ultimately become part of that bigger story. And on top of that, ultimately people are just going to. We're the early adopters, but others will step in line behind us. And I think that there is a sort of onward march of the whole regen movement generally, and I think it'll become much more landscape-based anyway. So, it will end up feeding vegetable, but it will happen just at its own speed.
I completely agree with that. Flour goes into 99% of households, so a whopping 1% of the market, which is what we are. We're not going to cut the mustard here. So it's going to require the larger organisations, of which all of those flour milling organisations, 80% of them are family businesses. They're not talking about it yet, but I'm sure they will follow on pretty quickly. So I think from a flour perspective, it will happen naturally. It couldn't be happening fast enough, as far as my opinion is.
Just to add to that, I think it's happening in other countries. We can quite often just think what's happening on our shores and just think that that's it. There's this big kind of fortress around us, and that's where it is. There are other farming systems in other countries that are showing that this is possible. What we need to be careful of that we don't constantly just listen to the narrative of, oh, you can never feed the world, you can never do this. I think a lot of the science is showing that we can, and a lot of the science is showing that we're going to have to. We're going to have to make it work. So.
I think this is a similar theme, but a number of people in the room engaged with public procurement over recent years, and particularly the Southwest Food Hub, which didn't sadly get off the ground. But I wonder what each of the panellists are doing to engage with local food procurement, particularly schools, hospitals, military, etc., and whether you're able to get your food into those kind of public places, which is such an important use of it.
I supply Exeter University with all its meat needs, as I do with Falmouth and quite a lot of schools. And quite a lot of schools have hubs where hubs of excellence. Basically, sort of down in South Hams, for instance, there's 9 or 10 schools all in a hub, and we supply them. The opportunities are there in public procurement, but big wins are. We've talked about for years and years, and we never quite get in. The MOD, the hospitals, and things like that. We go through TUCO, which is for University Buying Consortium. For that, that's a model which works beautifully well. They're really interested in the sustainability because the students are interested in sustainability. I think Exeter Uni is actually an exemplar when it comes to this sort of thing. When it comes to the buying here, at least. So it is possible. I've been talking to, Steve Barclay, about getting meats into venison in particular, into the MOD and hospitals in the last month or so. So there's always that, we're always on the cusp of doing it. An awful lot of the time, we just don't quite get over that cusp, and that's down to blockers within the procurement chain who just can't be bothered a lot of the time, and somehow we need that political will to drive it over the line.
If you've got any contact emails or phone numbers that I could use, that would be great and really helpful. A short thing is, we'd love to, and we'd love to do it more, and it just takes time.
Hi there. Yeah, just continuing on the discussion around the small abattoirs over here. You mentioned about this mobile abattoir project, which I've heard rumbling along in the background for quite a few years. So I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on that and where it's up to at present.
Well, mobile's an exaggeration. It's actually movable. It takes quite a lot of effort to move it. But this is the beginning of a concept which is growing. So we've had this is the Fur Farm one. It's a lorry. It's an articulated lorry which the lorry cab disappears, leaving it there, and we shove a bullock in one end, and it sort of crash and bang wallop, and bits of bullock come out the other end, and that's basically how it works. And it's a great concept, and it's a hub model, so you can move it. I have it for a period of time, and then Fur Farm in Gloucestershire has it for a certain amount of time. You could fit it around a market, for instance. You need infrastructure, you need a lairage, you need dirty water handling, and you need somewhere for the vet to go to the loo and fill in their forms and all that sort of thing. The most important thing with it is it's shaken up the thinking of the Food Standards Agency and it's made them think differently. And off the back of that, we've now got £4 million fund for small abattoirs to invest at a 40% recovery rate. So it's really good from that point of view. In the meantime, I've been asked by the Scilly Isles to build them a movable unit to go out to the Scilly Isles. And again, it's all incredibly context driven. So they only want to kill about 75 bullocks a year. So you can't afford an awful lot of capital expenditure. But the interesting thing is you can't have landscape recovery in a Scilly Isles perspective without livestock on the landscape. There's a risk to that livestock if they lose the ability to move it off the islands. So these projects do not mistake, they are critical to certain communities. And the Isle of Wight are coming to look at it. The Orkney Isles have been, all these islands have been trying to get slaughter units on their ground all this time. It's a fascinating sandpit to play in at the moment. So yeah, it's good.
There's 2 more questions. There's one here and then one over there, and then we'll finish for tea. So yes, please.
Yep, thanks very much. Question for Bertie. I work in the red meat sector. There's a lot of talk there about doing away with the Europe grid and bringing in a more sort of far-reaching meat spec that brings in sort of nutritional quality, eating quality, that sort of thing. Do you think that there's room in the sector that you work in to bring in a more sort of all-encompassing pricing structure for flour or for milling wheat?
What do you mean by all-encompassing? Transparent, or
to encompass some of these sort of, at the moment you're paying on a tonnage with all that the milling premium. Do you think, as some of these other sort of nutritional benefits that are commonly associated with regen are proved or more widely recognised, that there might be room for them to be reflected in the price that farmers get for the wheat?
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't tell you this, but if you're a farmer and you are doing it on a spec and it's normally on a protein spec, you should be paid a lot more if it goes well over the spec, because the flour mill is going to be making money. And I'm super screwing myself over here, but because bakers care about protein strength, protein quality, and water absorption. So you should ask, if you do deal with a subsidiary flour mill, it's not ours, you should ask for the specification back and say, oh, okay, well, how does that compare to others, and can I be paid more? Because we have done it with super high protein wheats that have come from conventional or regenerative agriculture, where you buy it on 13%, but they might have 14.5%. So you absolutely deserve more, for sure. Push back.
I'll bear that in mind, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, and our last question, please.
It's more of an observation, really, because been mentioned a couple of times in dispatches. But from the culinary perspective, and just talking about how we're seeing the movement in our end of the market, first of all, a lot of this is being driven by more sustainable approaches in terms of cooking, but also provenance, where the food's from, and also the effect that hospitality and the catering industry is having on sustainability. So we're seeing a lot of customers asking about where their food's from, what the food practices is behind it. A lot of people are choosing to come and stay in places of hospitality because they've got those credentials. So I can see the move from regenerative farming moving more into the mainstream. And you're absolutely right. It's all about quality. We can't produce great food unless we know where it's from and the quality of the food that's being produced from the farming. And we're prepared to pay for that. And our customer is proving that they are willing to pay for that too. So provenance is really key, and it's one of the key things that's coming out. It's what you're producing and what you do really does matter. But more importantly, the way that you produce it is making a big fact in the choice of the customer as well. So keep going.
So I think what the discussion's really brought out and what unifies all of the three examples we've heard is a strong sense of collaboration and open-mindedness. And I think that's really something for us to take away from today, and I think reflects strongly the spirit of Rootstock. So thank you very much to our three speakers. So yeah, time for a short tea break now.